What's going on, everybody? Welcome back into the FantasyPros YouTube channel. My name is Lucas Wenzel, and today we're going to be talking about 10 players on the waiver wire I'm looking to stash ahead of this weekend's slate and ahead of next week's waivers as well. But before we dive into any of that, if you want your chance at winning a signed Trayvon Diggs Dallas Cowboys mini helmet, courtesy of our friends over at Pristine Auction, you need to subscribe to the FantasyPros YouTube channel right now and comment below on this video. That's it. That's all I need to do. We will be announcing a winner right here on the channel, so make sure to turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize when we announce it. My number one stash this week is hands down Rex Burkhead. Now I get it. The Houston Texans are not exciting, and why in the world would you ever want to roster Rex Burkhead? Well, Dameon Pierce is listed as doubtful with a high ankle sprain going into Sunday's matchup with the Chiefs, and typically we don't see quick returns from such an injury. Early on this year, we saw Burkhead get quite the workload in the receiving game. He saw 5+ targets in 4 of the first 6 games of the season, and it's not like the Texans have a bad stretch of games coming up either. As I said, they get the Chiefs in week 15 and the Jaguars in week 17, who are both top 10 in fantasy points allowed to running backs on the season. Isaiah Hodgins made my top waiver wire stashes last week, and he does once again this week. He now has back-to-back weeks of 15+ fantasy points on 6 targets and a score while finishing as the wide receiver 21 and 22. His snap percentages are still on the rise, seeing a season-high 89% of the snaps in week 14. Now, the Giants aren't always going to be getting blown out and having to play from behind, but based on his recent production, Hodgins falls into the break-the-glass emergency play tier of players, mostly in deeper leagues. Someone has to continue catching passes in this offense, though, and Hodgins is taking advantage of the opportunities being thrown his way. As of this recording, Ramondre Stevenson hasn't practiced this week, and Damien Harris has only returned in limited fashion. So on the chance neither play in week 15, I want to get ahead of the curve and stash Pierre Strong. I realize he was outsnapped by Kevin Harris in week 14, but Strong was the more productive back in relief. He only had 1 less touch, broke off a big 44-yard run, caught a pair of passes, and found pay dirt to cap it all off. Even if Damien Harris returns in week 15, I'm not convinced the Patriots give him a full workload fresh off of injury. We could see Strong rotate in for some receiving work, as pass catching has never been Damien Harris's forte. Originally, when Cooper Kupp went down, Ben Skowronek was one of my favorite stashes, but he didn't entirely pan out until this past week. Skowronek led all Rams wide receivers in receiving yards and fantasy points against the Raiders in week 14. He's still on the field a ton. His snap percentages over the past 5 weeks have been 98, 84, 63, 97, and 100% this past week. We've seen Baker be successful with Jarvis Landry in the past, who ran the majority of his routes from the slot. Skowronek is 16th in slot snaps this year, so we could see Baker rely on the short passing game with him even more in the coming weeks. I've mentioned the importance of handcuffed running backs plenty of times in these stash videos, and I'm going to continue preaching it. Austin Eckler is the number 1 overall running back in PPR formats, and he should 100% be insured going into the playoffs. Since returning from injury, Kelly has clearly replanted himself as Eckler's backup. He's played at least 40% of the snaps in each of the past 2 weeks, while averaging nearly 6 yards per carry. Now, he's doing that on only 7 touches per game, but Isaiah Spiller has been knocked out of the picture almost entirely, so if you're going to insure Eckler for the fantasy playoffs, it best be with Joshua Kelly. Jahan Dotson seemed to be left in the dust of this Washington Commanders offense after coming back from his injury, but his week 13 performance caught my attention. After seeing only 4 total targets between weeks 10 through 12 and not playing any more than 66% of the snaps, Dotson saw a season-high 9 targets, caught a score, and finished as the wide receiver 19 in week 13 prior to their week 14 bye. His snap percentage spiked back up to 79% as well. How sustainable is this? To be determined, but given that Dotson gets the Browns and 49ers in the fantasy playoffs, who are both top 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers over the past 5 weeks, I'm willing to stash him on the upside he's flashed this year. Moving on to another rookie wide receiver, Alec Pierce was quietly making a splash prior to the Colts week 14 bye as well. He had seen 8 targets in 2 of 3 games prior to their bye, and even finished as the wide receiver 15 against Dallas in week 13. On the season, he has a 72.9% route participation rate, which is important because, well, you can't really have the opportunity to score fantasy points if you're not running routes. If I need a break the glass emergency play like I mentioned earlier, Alec Pierce might be my number one option against the Vikings in Week 15, who have been nothing short of pitiful against wide receivers this year. They've allowed the most fantasy points, receptions, receiving yards, and the 5th most yards per reception to wideouts this year. I've seen a lot of buzz around Devontae Parker with the news of Jacoby Myers potentially slated to miss more time, but I may be more interested in Nelson Agholor, especially since Devontae Parker is banged up too. Agholor has seen 8+ targets, caught 5+ passes, and played at least 78% of the snaps in 2 of his past 3 games. Fantasy-wise, it hasn't turned into much, but if both of these wide receivers miss any more time, Agholor becomes the wide receiver 1 for Mac Jones in this Patriots offense. Looking ahead, he gets the Raiders in Week 14, who are top 10 in fantasy points allowed to wide receivers over the past 5 weeks, and friendly matchups with the Dolphins and Bills to close out the season. Again, we take a journey to the desolate wasteland of the tight end position in fantasy football, and I am jumping all over Tyler Conklin if you're streaming tight ends for the next 4 weeks. I'm ecstatic about Conklin's schedule to close out the season, but we also need to acknowledge that Conklin's seen 7+ targets in each of his past 2 games with Mike White. Should this volume continue, we're looking at an incredible opportunity for Conklin down the stretch. He draws Detroit, Jacksonville, Seattle, and Minnesota, who are all top 10 in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends, meaning they allow a ton of points to the position. We're going to keep the Paul Bear Bryant mantra of defense wins championships and stash the Titans defense heading into the fantasy playoffs. I know they just threw up a -4-point stinker against the Jaguars, and I am not suggesting you play them against the Chargers this week. Yikes. But in Week 16, they get the Houston Texans, who may still be without Dameon Pierce. I know the secondary is this team's biggest weakness, but I'm not banking on Davis Mills or Jeff Driscoll, whoever is in at quarterback, to take the top off this defense. Get a jump on stashing defenses early because they can make the difference in the playoffs, especially when it becomes a week-to-week game. Alright, yo, before I get out of here, remember, if you want your chance at winning a signed Trayvon Diggs Dallas Cowboys mini helmet, courtesy of our friends over at Pristine Auction, you need to subscribe to the FantasyPros YouTube channel right now and comment below on this video. That's it. That's all you need to do. Might make a great stocking stuffer. We will be announcing a winner right here on the channel, so make sure to turn on those notifications so you can be alerted when new episodes are up and to claim your prize when we announce it.
Thanks for tuning in to the FantasyPros YouTube channel. Don't forget to check out our featured videos, and while you're at it, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at FantasyPros, so you can get the latest news and updates to give you the edge you need in your fantasy league.